Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Israel Hawkins. Well, the pharmaceutical industry is experiencing yet some more woes as people are talking or up in arms over the disbursement of a ton of opioid drugs being dumped on three states in particular. Okay. Iran, of course, they're still in the news. They've been in the news for a while. We've been talking about them for some time now, and the scrimmages between them and the U.S. Now is claiming that they have captured or seized a British tanker. The U.S. is saying that they shot down an Iranian drone. Iran is saying, nope, I don't think so. Check your sources. And the U.S., in regards to Iran, is also working on building up its military presence in a desert that might have been forgotten by some, but was actually in existence in the first Iraq war of Saudi Arabia, desert of Saudi Arabia. And those are just several of the reports we have for you today. But first, we're going to talk about federal prosecutors have filed charges against pharmaceutical companies for conspiring with doctors and pharmacies to pour millions of highly addictive opioid pills into the states of Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky. They are accused of doing this in order to gain profit over health. Now, there are currently four main companies that produce the majority of the opioids, that being Spec GX, Actavis Pharma, Par Pharmaceutical, and Purdue Pharma.
Well, now the public is holding them accountable, filing lawsuits for these substances that they were pushing onto the public despite the fact that they knew they were addictive. Now, legal loopholes have enabled new drugs to reach the market sooner. Drug companies also pay out big settlements to keep themselves in the shadows, but some are asking, how much longer is that tactic going to work?
Drug manufacturers are continually raising drug prices to whatever the market can bear because they're essentially driven to make as much profit as possible, said Anna Lemke with RT News. The pharmaceutical industry in the U.S. has manipulated both doctors and patients by misrepresenting evidence around opioids by overstating the benefit and understating the risk. Drug companies have a simple solution to these lawsuits or these settlements: just raise the prices of the drugs to the consumer, she said.
Well, American medical care is already the most expensive in the world, so for those who are addicted to the drugs or in desperate need of painkillers, they'll always be willing to pay more.
Boy, that is sad. Well, scientists are finding that they don't really know how antidepressants really work. In a recent study in the British medical journal, Danish researchers are calling out the accuracy of existing studies. Now, in two analysts, 522 studies included over 117,000 depressed patients. They found that all types of antidepressant drugs seem to benefit a little bit better than a placebo. The new analyst includes the same study, but Danish researchers have focused on assessing the extent on which they can rely on the results of the existing antidepressant research.
Well, their conclusion is that 50% of the studies, there is a high risk of systematic distortion, making the effect of the medicine seem to be greater than it actually is. Now, the researchers said, we are not saying that antidepressants don't work, but the studies that have been done are often of poor quality, and it's therefore difficult to say anything about the effect of antidepressants. Some get better while taking the medicine, and the experience of getting better is really enough. But you cannot conclude that this is due to the medicine.
Well, the researchers do say that previous studies show that the medicine is effective. They don't actually highlight how much more effective it is than a placebo or alternative treatments. Dr. Norman Freed, a board-certified psychologist, thinks otherwise. He said there are many articles that are in JAMA as well as in journals of psychology that are scrutinized by peer-reviewed journals of the efficacy of these medications. When we hear people saying it isn't working for them, he said, I'm worried it's more that it's more a word of mouth gossip than anything else. So he doesn't agree with that.
Well, over the past 15 years, the price of insulin has soared, causing diabetics to ration their medication or die because they can't afford it. So why does the same insulin that cost $175 15 years ago cost $1,487 today? Well, author Jack Rasmus, who is a professor of political economy at St. Mary's College, joined RT to discuss this topic and his thoughts on why the increase in the drug that's relied upon by millions. Take a listen.
The price for insulin has skyrocketed over the past 15 years in the U.S., leaving a growing number of diabetics rationing their medicine or dying from complications from the disease. Today, we're asking the question, why does the same insulin that cost $175 15 years ago now cost $1,487 today? To discuss this, I'm joined by Jack Rasmus, author and professor of political economy at St. Mary's College. Jack, thank you so much for joining me today. When insulin was originally discovered by scientists, it cost $1 at University of Toronto. Why are drug prices so high now when these drugs themselves are not even expensive to manufacture?
Well, as you indicated yourself, from less than $200 a vial, it's almost on its way to $2,000 a vial. Not just insulin, but you look at treatment for ovarian cancer, you can pay $7,000 for 1 month treatment for that. $70,000 for to be cured from hepatitis C. The drug companies, major drug companies, just 40 of them just announced price increases of 13% this month, and every 6 months they raise prices 8 to 12%. Every 6 months here for the last several years. Why are they going so high? Well, because they can. Why can they? Because pretty much Wall Street demands higher prices and selling more of something in order to get the funding for these companies to engage in mergers and acquisitions of each other, and that's going on globally. This year they'll spend $400 billion in M&A activity. Well, they got to get it somewhere. They jack up the prices to do that. And because we have no price controls in the U.S. on these things, unlike in Europe, Canada, Japan, they have pharma price controls. They get away with it. And Congress does very little in response to it because, this industry, the pharmaceutical industry, is one of the biggest lobbyist spenders in the whole U.S. They spend $300 to $400 million a year just on lobbying. That's not counting campaign contributions. $300 to $400 million a year just on lobbying. That's not counting campaign contributions. $300 to $400 million a year just on lobbying. That's not counting campaign contributions. So the politicians are terrified. They don't respond.
And you answered just that. The pharmaceutical industry is the biggest lobby here in D.C. because they have the money. They're allowed to rack up these prices. These companies are allowed to mark up the price as much as 5,000%. There's money in this industry where they're constantly in front of Congress lobbying for this. Where's the other side in this?
Well, they get away with it because, they manipulate the patent system. They game the patent system. There's ways of doing that. You just repackage a product and, you get your patent extended. There's other ways that they game the system. Hedge funds in Wall Street have gotten their claws into the pharma industry. You mentioned the $5,000 hike in an AIDS drug here, Martin Shkreli. And Valiant and some of these other companies, they do it because they grab these orphan drugs that were once charged very little, and they jack up the price because they have a monopoly, they have a patent on it, and they can get away with it, and no one's doing anything about it, very little about it. We just saw Trump try to do something about it by simply saying, oh, well, let's let the consumers see how much it costs, the list price. Well, the courts just came down and said, oh, that's a violation of free speech of these corporations.
Well, and should health care, the bigger argument here, be a human right, or should it remain as an opportunity to profit for these big companies? People who can't afford the health care are the ones that are saved, while those who can't are the ones who get sick and possibly the consequence lead to death. Is keeping people healthy and alive simply just not profitable for Wall Street?
No, it's not profitable. What's profitable for Wall Street is to raise the price on these things, to do more mergers and acquisitions, to push more pills. Washington Post just put out a database that showed 75 billion pills here are annually pushed on America, and most of those don't have any effect, and some of them have a very negative effect. I mean, face it, we've got 47,000 deaths every year just from prescribed opioids, 47,000. That's a Vietnam War every year being waged on American people by the big pharma industry. And ironically, we're paying for the bullets by higher prices. Yes, it's very profitable to kill people with overdoses for drugs. Yes, it's very profitable to kill people with overdoses for drugs. Yes, it's very profitable to kill people with overdoses for drugs like fentanyl and OxyContin, but it's also very profitable to just push more of it onto people, and that's what Wall Street wants, because pharma has to make big profits.
It's all about
if
profit.
They're going to get big money.
It's all about the money. The opioid crisis has gone further out of control, and we see doctors just prescribing these medications like nothing, where we need to do more to really get that out there and control the opioid crisis.
Interesting comments by the professor. I liked when he said that actually when he was asked a question about is keeping people profitable, and he said no, it's the sick people is where they generate, those who get hooked on the drugs, that's where the profits come in. So health is not profitable for these companies.
No, again, like we just talked about a little earlier, the accusation against these large pharmaceutical companies is that they are putting profits ahead of the health of their consumers, and consumers at the end of the day are paying the price, not only by either having a drug that they're addicted to that they can't afford, but in some cases a drug that they absolutely need, not because of addiction, but they can't afford either. So pharmaceutical companies are looking at their bank accounts and adjusting prices accordingly, instead of taking into consideration how can this actually help the person, how can we make it more available to them without causing more harm to them psychologically or financially. Well, we now turn it over to our field correspondent Larry McGee, who has been watching the dangerous situation in the Middle East, and he's going to talk about some of the things with the nations around the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, we want to know, how are they feeling right now about the problems between the U.S. and Iran? And of course, Larry, what can you tell us about that recent I believe the drone, we had the downing of the drone that the United States allegedly said that they shot down. What do you have for us, some information on that?
As the back and forth between Persia and the West continues to escalate, it is becoming increasingly difficult for everyone observing not to sense the inevitability of war. In the latest blow, Iran is said to have seized a British oil tanker, and following behind that, the U.S. is reporting to have shot down an Iranian drone. In a strange turn of events, however, Tehran is saying that the drone, which President Trump publicly announced to have been gunned down and destroyed for defensive purposes, was really never shot down at all. In fact, Iran's deputy foreign minister is saying that Iran is not missing any of its drones. Since warfare includes lies, it is said to be anyone's guess at this point what the actual truth is. But along with this conflict, there is also increasing tensions between the U.S. and China, who is an Iranian ally. Along with their economic spat, China is reportedly upset with the U.S. over a number of other issues, including its relationship with Taiwan. Beijing considers the country to be a renegade province, which rightfully belongs under its jurisdiction, but America has created a strategic partnership with the nation, bolstering it with weapon sales and establishing diplomatic relations, even though Beijing has been screaming its disapproval the entire time. With another state visit from President Tsai Ing-wen scheduled for this month, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has released a statement saying that the U.S. should not allow Tsai's transit and must stop the official exchange with Taiwan. In a bold move, China is now also attributing all the turmoil in the Euphrates region to America in its fight with Iran. That fight is yet to produce any human casualties on the American side, and Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, who was in the States this week to exercise diplomacy, says Iran would like to keep it that way. France is reportedly also getting involved to try and ensure that cooler heads prevail in the powder keg conflict that Mrs. Zarif is admitting was just minutes away from exploding into a full-blown war recently with the downing of a U.S. drone. All attempts at mediation between the two nations has urged diplomacy. But as for the two powers themselves, Iran says it is willing to negotiate if America lifts sanctions. And in response, America has imposed more sanctions. So the two nations remain deadlocked in a very precarious and perilous stalemate. The U.S. wants to see Iran cease all enrichment of uranium, even the allowable amounts permitted by the 2015 agreement, which America has pulled out of, but China, Russia, and other international co-signers are still advocating. Despite increasing hostilities, both Washington and Tehran continue to assert a desire to avoid war. Saudi Arabia is now reportedly also getting involved in hopes of staving off the emergence of human casualties, which President Trump has stated is his red line. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, we can see there that there's not a lot of communication going back between the U.S. and Iran, but it looks like they each have established their red line. The U.S., of course, saying if an American life is lost, that would be their red line. So still a very touchy situation between the U.S. and Iran.
That's right.
Well, China has released a new paper accusing the U.S. and its allies of causing global instability through the provocation of conflicts with other major countries. Now, the paper, entitled China's National Defense in the New Era, alleges the United States is engaging in technological advances primarily so they can pursue complete military superiority.
The Chinese document states, quote, the U.S. has provoked and intensified competition among major countries, significantly increased its defense expenditure, pushed for additional capacity in nuclear, outer space, cyber, and missile defense, and undermined global strategic stability, end quote.
Well, China also pointed out while it has the second largest economy in the world, the United States has the largest military budget. And in 2017, as an example, it spent only a quarter of the money the United States spent on its defense budget.
Well, at the same time, this paper came out. The director of the FBI said he believes China poses the biggest counterintelligence threat of any country. During an oversight hearing for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI Director Christopher Wray told the Senate Judiciary Committee, I would say that there's no country that poses a more severe counterintelligence threat to this country right now than China.
Well, he told the chairman of the Judiciary Committee that he didn't make this statement lightly, and when asked who would be the second, Wray answered, probably Russia. Now, China's foreign ministry spokeswoman Hu Chunying did not take long to respond to the accusation, stating, unlike the U.S., what we did and believe are completely different. China does not steal, loot, or lie. We achieve such remarkable achievements today with our wisdom and struggle. If China is fighting a war, she said, it is a war to defend its legitimate rights and interests.
And it's interesting, she said China does not steal, cheat, or lie when not too long ago we did a report referring to how Mike Pompeo was actually kind of bragging on the fact that when he was in the CIA, that's kind of what they were taught to do, lie, cheat, and steal. And here China's saying, to the contrary, we don't do that.
Right.
Interesting.
Bragging and actually a little bit of joking and laughter, making light of the fact that they do those, uncharacteristic type things.
Yeah, and other countries realize that, and that kind of lessens the integrity of the United States in the eyes of others.
Absolutely.
Well, China's defense ministry also made it clear they would not be in agreement with anyone who supported an independent Taiwan. Chinese defense minister spokesman said, "We are willing to strive for the prospect of peaceful unification with utmost sincerity and effort. However, we have to be very clear that seeing Taiwan's independence will meet a dead end."
Well, he continued, "If anyone dares to separate Taiwan from China, the Chinese army will certainly fight, resolutely defending the country's sovereign unity and territorial integrity."
Well, due to the rising tensions between the U.S. and Iran, we have just heard about, the Pentagon is preparing for a worst-case scenario. What looks like in the middle of nowhere in the Saudi Arabian desert is actually very near the Prince Sultan Air Base, or PSAB, as soldiers call it. General Frank McKenzie, the top U.S. military commander for the Middle East, is there to work on a major new military buildup for a possible war with Iran.
Well, Prince Sultan Air Base, while not surrounded by anything but sand, is far from unequipped. Now, it has a 10,000-foot runway and ramp space to house hundreds of aircraft. Now, the military buildup would start with the U.S. bringing in a squadron of their top F-22 fighters. But that's just the beginning. And General McKenzie told CBS News' David Martin, "There have been a lot of planes there in the past, so you could bring as many as you want to Prince Sultan Air Base," indicating the capacity is very large.
Well, looking back in history to the eve of the first Gulf War in 1990, the air base was filled with American warplanes from wingtip to wingtip, ready to go to war with Iraq. Now, almost 30 years later, the U.S. and its allies are on a similar course of rising tensions, this time with Iran.
Well, based on the capabilities of the air base, it appears to be at the beginning of preparations to handle an all-out war with Iran. But General McKenzie prefers to say, quote, "It's like a signal that we're not going to be cowed," in other words, intimidated, by Iranian malign activities.
The base will be supplied through the Saudi port of Yanbu, which is along the Red Sea. This will allow the U.S. to bring in spare ammunition and parts without having to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, this will avoid the watchful eyes of the Iranian Navy. It is clear from these developments that the U.S. is preparing for the possibility of a war with Iran.
And going back to something that was mentioned in our field correspondent Larry McGee's articles, that the U.S. and Iran were minutes away from war when that drone was first shot down. And that was the drone that was confirmed when the Iranians shot down the U.S. drone. But that right there just is a huge signal that we are very close on the brink of war with Iran. This buildup in the Sultan Air Base there, that's no small thing. President Trump saying that he would be willing to send over thousands of troops to prepare for a war with Iran. So it looks like everything is lined out. And of course, what's going to be different with this war with Iran versus the war with Iraq, Iraq didn't have much to fight back with. Iran is pretty heavily equipped, and it's going to bring in other players into this and definitely be hell on earth, as some of the analysts are now saying.
They already have some backing from larger countries, as we already know, and of course the United States is contending with Russia and China, which are two of the largest countries that are kind of backing some of the United States' quote-unquote enemies. So we can see that with the powers behind smaller countries like Iran, like we saw with Syria, that it kind of somewhat levels out the playing field when they're having to deal with the United States. And what we're seeing here is like we said, like you just said, bringing us closer to war. And if they haven't already, I have a feeling that at some point, you know, they're going to move that doomsday clock a little bit closer to midnight, because we're definitely looking like we're getting to that point.
If you'd like to find out more about these stories, contact the House Yahweh, and when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to yahweh.com, yisroelhawkins.com, and yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to ypnnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And again, as we've mentioned before, don't forget the free online versions of the Yisrael Says and Ask Yisrael programs that are perfect aids in assisting you in studying and understanding the things written in your Holy Scriptures, including the prophecies for this time period. You can find those programs by typing in YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another enlightening and cheerful message from Yisroel Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.